and welcome to Technosocial. Today we're here with Stacey Knight from CSM Live, and we're going to have a conversation about esports. It's in fact our second attempt at doing this because last time Dylan forgot the cables. So
I'm definitely going to cut that bit out.
round two, we've had the dress rehearsal. Here we go. So Stacey, welcome and thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So I guess I want to start with just a simple one. Like, what are esports and where did they come from?
So esports or virtual gaming is what, a lot of people have played for a hell of a long time. It's your Xbox, your PlayStations, your online gaming, even down to mobile gaming, but it's more competitive. So it's a competitive online gaming. They tend to be first-person shooters or battle arenas online. So think the likes of Dota 2, for example, or League of Legends, all of those type of things. Where did it come from? Look, it's grown. It's happened very much from an organic community basis. Gamers getting together, wanting to play together, play off versus each other, and it's now become one of the most watched sports globally. Over 1 billion people actively watch or take part in esports. 15 million unique users every single day via Twitch. This is big business.
I mean, I guess you saw it in the news recently. There was that kid who won...
Jaden Ashman, a.k.a. Wolfman.
Yeah.
Good name.
What was the prize? Was it like $2 million?
It was $2.5 million that he split with his Dutch partner, so they played as a duo. They won second place. They didn't even win first place. But to put it into context, they won more than Williams won, for example, at Wimbledon. So your number one spot at Wimbledon earns less than getting a number two spot as an esports gamer on Fortnite.
Yeah, wow.
So it shows you the amount of money that's behind it. It also shows you the fact that it's becoming or is a sport in its own right.
I mean, it says something that I think, certainly to myself until quite recently, it's like, well, esports is this kind of niche thing, and I suppose it's kind of small, but no, if people are winning more money than something like Wimbledon, tennis, which is, I mean, about as established as a sport as you can get, I think maybe football, cricket, rugby are above that, but yeah, it's huge.
It is huge, and look, I think it's been a long time in coming, getting the recognition that it's deserved. It's only just now started to filter through to kind of mainstream mass media in many respects. The BBC picking up about Jaden and his fantastic prize win. FIFA, the recent FIFA at the O2 tournament being picked up and run as well. It's starting to slowly hit mainstream, but people still don't know a hell of a lot about it. They still get this kind of misconception that it's this, it's the limit or the remit of a 16-year-old guy sitting in his bedroom eating copious amounts of fast food, when in fact, esports competitors they have to train just as hard as professional athletes, because if you want to be at the top of your league, if you want that kind of super fast, smart capabilities to be able to perform some of the moves you have to perform on virtual games, then you've got to be peak fitness, both mentally and physically at the same time. So a lot of effort now is going into kind of performance, both on a physical and a kind of mental attributes, which I would say then, most definitely puts it in line with main sports. As well as that, one of the questions I always get asked is esports, genuinely, Stacey, is esports a game? Like a proper sport? The loose classification everybody always used to throw back at me, is it's not, because if you want to play a sport, you have to change your shoes, and if you change your shoes from your normal day-to-day, then it's classified as a sport, which is quite frankly bullshit.
Put on my chess shoes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, chess is a really good point, because the IOC, so the International Olympic Committee, and over 100 countries classify chess as a sport. It's a recognised sport. So you put that in the same league as esports, and you go, well, of course esports is a recognised sport in its own right.
Not to mention that didn't Nike recently release a line of gaming shoes?
Yeah, Nike, K-Swiss, brands, apparel brands are going, there is big money here. There is a massive audience. 400 million people view it on a regular basis, over 1 billion viewers and competitive gamers. You have sponsorship revenues, which make up about 32% of overall money, which is worth over $450 million. This is big money here we're talking about. So yeah, merchandise apparel brands are jumping on the bandwagon, food brands as well, nutrition brands. It's big business. It's only going to grow as well.
Wow. So, I mean, how would you respond to sort of like the mom whose 14-year-old kid just will not get off the Xbox and he's playing Fortnite and she's like, you're not, like, this is not a productive use of your time, and he's like, I'm going to be a millionaire, Mom, I'm going to win at Fortnite like that kid on TV, and I'm going to make so much money if you just let me play Fortnite all day. Like,
I suppose, look, there's a dual thing here. It's exactly the same as saying, you know, a mother turning around and saying to her child, why do you go rock climbing all the time? There's no money in it. Or why do you go skateboarding? Or why do you go down to a track and do the 100 meters? You're never going to win an Olympic medal. You're never going to be first place. But it's recognized that actually, you know, regardless of whether you get to that competitive level and regardless of whether you win loads of money, if it's physically and mentally good for you, that's a great thing. It also instills a sense of community. You know, esports players do not work in a solo kind of blinkered way. They have a big community around them that they will, one, be competitive with, but also where they will help and support. You know, in today's modern society, friendships don't just happen physically, they happen socially. Social media and esports is a version of that. And yes, there is big money to be made in it. And you know what? If I could go back 2 years to before I was 21 and train again, and if I had the mental aptitude to be able to become an esports player, my God, I would be. Yeah, hands down.
Now that point about friends is really interesting. My little brother, he's really, really into gaming, and for a long time, I was like, does he just sit in his room playing games all the time? What about his social life? Until I asked him about it, and he was like, I'm on headset talking to my mates all the time. And I was like, wow, he's more social than me. Far more social than me.
And it's, you know, you have a common bond with people when you're playing, and you're doing it in a competitive way, and you form leagues, you form competitive teams, you're working together. All of these are really great stuff. For one, if you do go out into the wider world and get full-time jobs, or two, you want to change your jobs, or whatever it is. And with that many people watching it online, with that many people taking part competitively or just playing, it's not a bad thing. More people play video games than use Twitter, Snapchat and Instagram.
Wow, that's pretty mind-boggling to think about it that way, but it
Big
never gets portrayed that way in the media. It's always like, kind of like, oh, these sort of small group of weird nerds who just stay in the room, whereas, like, you know, oh, everyone's on like Instagram now. Like, that's the real world. Like,
yeah, when your parents go on Instagram and finally start using Instagram, and suddenly they go, oh, actually, Instagram's really cool, isn't it? It's just because, you know, people don't understand something that they turn it into this negative misconception. Esports is not a negative thing to be involved in at all. Yes, it has its darker sides. Anything does. But it should still be embraced.
There's something about the participation in it that actually is more active and engaging than, say, some of the more traditional media consumption, which might be sitting in front of a TV, for example. Like, if I had a kid, I'd rather they were playing a collective, collaborative or competitive game with someone else, which, for example, they've actually cohered themselves, than sitting passively in front of the TV just absorbing.
Exactly right, you know, and people were the kind of Netflix generation almost. A lot of people consume video on demand. So you're not even exposed to kind of natural breaks. You binge watch now. That's the way of it. But there is no participation involved in sitting in front of a TV screen or a laptop watching something. Whereas esports, you do participate in. Even if you're passively watching, with platforms like Twitch, you can get involved. And that's good.
Yeah, the community beyond the actual game itself is very participatory, and I think there's a self-organisation to it too, which is very interesting, that I think isn't the same perhaps in the traditional sports world, where say you might play as part of a established local team and you go to that place and it's there, whereas an esports team, from what I've gathered from talking to my brother, like they're people that some of them were friends in the real world, they met other people online, and now they've kind of come together and they do it all together.
Completely. And what's really nice as well is look at esports as a sport. It is and has the capacity to be the most utopian sport that exists, where it doesn't matter where you live, it's not super expensive to get involved in. It doesn't matter on your gender or race or sexuality or beliefs. That's all parked to the side. What's important is you come together in a virtual world and you're playing competitively. That's good. Now, that's the utopian vision of esports. Like with anything, there is also a darker side. And with esports, it's because it was community born, because it's come out of very passionate people, and because you are effectively hiding behind a virtual persona. That's why you have, Jane Nashman is Wolfman, for example. You have a name, a pseudonym. It also means that a small proportion, will resort to bullying or trolling online, and that some of these communities are pretty horrific places to try and play, or to try and promote yourself, or to try and have fun, or even gain, skills and what you need. You will be crucified for how you play if they find out what gender you are, or any kind of personal information that you should choose to release. Certain individuals will jump on that. Now, it's not to say that this is solely a remit. Trolling is solely a remit of esports, because it's not. If you go anywhere online, that'll happen. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, notwithstanding. But it just so happens that it's even more prevalent because you've got incredibly passionate people that believe so much in what they're doing playing esports, that some forums and some communities can be really aggressive and hard places to exist in, which is why, and I think it adds up to the fact that you don't see as many professional pro females. Look at Fortnite, which you mentioned was a really good example, Dylan. All the 100 finalists were men. Look at FIFA, exactly the same. You don't have, there's only a handful of top elite female esports professionals, and I think a lot of that is down to the fact that they find the community trolling aspect really hard to deal with. So like most sports, that kind of mental awareness is something that esports needs to learn, grow into, self-regulate, and kind of stop out, because it could be the sport by which every other traditional sport looks to as a shining example of good.
Could you not put that in part maybe down to how sort of young of a sport it is, especially in terms of being seen as a sport? Because esport in some form or another has been around since competitive gaming was actually, I think it was like Nintendo through some of the first ever like competitive sort of tournaments, where like basically tournaments of video games. But because it's only now really being taken, like even recognized as happening by the mainstream media, let alone being considered a sport, it's much more going to be influenced by sort of the niche culture that it originated from, rather than sort of just wider culture. And sort of where it comes from is basically the internet, because obviously esports, the easiest way to hook up with people. Back in the day, they used to have LAN tournaments and everyone would bring their computer around to someone's house, but now it's all online. And then the thing about internet culture and gamers is because they're tech savvy. They tend to go on anonymous internet forums, and anonymous internet forums, by virtue of their anonymity, tend to be where everyone who wants to say things that they wouldn't knowingly say while they weren't behind the veil in anonymity gathers to say. And so there's this sort of huge influence from that aspect of internet culture, from just like trolls and just basically slightly vile people. And, you know, sort of going forward, as it receives more exposure, we might expect to see less of that.
Yeah, I think so. I think the game, like you have to look at esports as an entity. It's still in its early days. It's probably just hit its kind of teenage years at the moment. You look at really established traditional sports, they've been around for hundreds if not thousands of years. So working out how they run, working out how they perform is kind of there or thereabouts. Still work to be done, granted. But you take something like esports, and as you quite rightly said, it has been around that long, particularly when you bring in the World Wide Web and you bring in people gaming online, and you bring in the fact that you need the technology to be able to do that. So it's not reached maturity yet, and I think the more it gets picked up, I think the more that brands, particularly, is the power of brands and sponsorship, is where you'll start seeing regulations really coming in. And what we have to be careful of is that we don't kill what makes esports a fantastic kind of sport in its own right, which is the community aspect, and what you bring in is regulation that cleans up trolling. And yes, it's fine to have a bit of banter, but it's not taken so far that what you're doing is jeopardising someone's mental or what can lead into physical well-being. But I think it is early stages for this sport as a sport, and I think it will gain more traction. I think it will hit more mainstream media, and as the mainstream start to understand what it actually means, the generations that are playing it and why it's important, I think it will be cleaned up more. So I think, you know, you only get headlines at the moment when it's a UK player, you know, because we're based in the UK, when a UK player wins money, or when there's a scandal, which there have been a few, but then there have been in every sport. Look at the Australia, you know. Yeah,
look at the FIFA corruption, like, you know, everything that seems to be ongoing
every
all
sport
the time.
you're always going to get this right. So, you know, what we need to do is have really positive role models that exist within the esports world that are able to champion the sport as its own right. And I think that'll be really important. Gaming is big business. Yeah, gaming is a huge business.
Bigger than movies.
It can be big. You look at Call of Duty, for example, queues around the block, and if you compared that to a closest movie, you would be number one. You'd be smashing box office. So you have to look at it going, it's big business. It's not going to go away. It's going to get even more sophisticated. Tournaments are only going to get bigger. More brands are going to get involved, particularly non-endemic brands are going to get involved more, and that will bring with it certain levels of regulation, because they will demand that it's a clean, safe sport.
What stands out to you about the ways that brands are currently engaging with esports? Because I remember when we spoke previously, you had some interesting points about how the community tends to reject anything that feels inauthentic, which means brands have to be careful with how they're targeting their messaging, and even there's a certain filter that says not everybody can be in this space yet.
Absolutely. You know, you look at traditional broadcast advertising, and just about any brand, give or take, can appear at any time across anything. TV advertising, if you're a FMCG brand, you can roll out any time of the day or night. You're an alcohol brand, you just have to do it past 9 o'clock, but you can roll that out too. With esports it's different because it's community based, it's that passion based. So if you have brands that are involved in esports that have no damn right to be involved in esports, then the community are going to look at it and go, why are you here? Like, what are you doing? What are you adding to this? You're adding nothing. In fact, you're just smearing the walls with advertising. So quite frankly, get lost. And it'll do more harm than good. What brands have to be careful of is, yes, there's a huge audience that they want to hit. Yes, there's an incredibly valuable audience, you know, that they want to reach, that don't consume traditional media like other generations did, but they have to do it in a way that is truly authentic. They have to enhance the experience. They have to take the game to the next level and not just use it as a branding exercise to get in front of billions of eyeballs. And if they do that, then it will make sense. But they have to be really careful. I remember back in the day, Facebook had just launched and it was the flavour of the moment, and every brand was saying to me, we need to be on Facebook. And the question I always ask them is why? What do you want to do on Facebook? Like, why do you want to be there? And if a brand can't give you a really good reason, they shouldn't be doing it. And that's exactly the same question that I'm saying back to them when they ask me about esports. We want to do esports. Why? Because there's billions of people that watch it. But why do you want to be there? Apart from just reaching eyeballs, like, why? Who cares whether you're there or not? Like, you need to give me a proper answer. You need to say, what are you going to be delivering to the community? And if you can, and if it's authentic, and if it's right, then we'll help you devise a strategy in doing that. And if it's not, we will pull you away from any remote relationship with that esports community, and we'll put you somewhere else where it does make sense. So I think a lot of non-endemic brands want to get involved. It's a case of going, be careful, plan it logically, strategize, make sure it makes sense for you, understand where are you going to enter, you know, what are you going to support? Do you want your family friendly laundry detergent to be round an uber violent first-person shooter game? Is that what you want? Because if the answer is no, and it probably is, you need to reformulate that strategy. And it might be you go down the Mario route, for example. But brands just need to be careful about how they're getting involved in this community.
Yeah, I remember, I think the best example of failed sort of advertising in that respect was when Mountain Dew and Doritos did like an advertising thing with, I think it was Halo 4, where you buy special bottles of Mountain Dew and bags of Doritos and you scan a code on them and you get some like in-game currency. And there was this really horrific like launch where there was, I think it was like the lead dev on Halo 4 was sat there with like Mountain Dew on one side and Doritos on the other, like explaining the whole sort of system. And it just became a meme. And now Mountain Dew and Doritos are like a meme. And whenever someone sort of acts like the sort of traditional idea of your sort of like very unhealthy video game junkie at like 4 a.m. with his Mountain Dew. Whenever someone acts in that way to take the piss out of them, you might like edit a Mountain Dew t-shirt onto them. So like now just by sort of like massively overselling it and trying to look really cool, they've ended up associating themselves specifically with the bad side of gaming. And like it's kind of, you know, it's just an example of how the community will just rip you apart if they don't think like they, you know, this is a community who is like ripping people apart is almost a tradition, like for gamer culture, is that like no matter who you are and what you do, there's like a huge list of people that the community just decided to like annihilate. I think one of the most obvious ones was Phil Fish. There's a good sort of series of YouTube videos that I can't remember who did them on basically what happened around Phil Fish. And he was this video game developer who developed this really, really great indie game. But then his online, on the internet, he just liked to act like a bit of an arsehole. And then the community just like picked up on that and completely ripped him apart and like demonized him. And he's had to disengage with the whole online sphere completely because of it. And so this is a community that will go after you for fun. Like for no other reason than it is something to do. So like I can see how from an advertising standpoint you have to be really like, you have to have a plan of how you're actually going to put your product into something in a way that people feel like you're contributing to the experience, or that at least that it isn't out of place. Because the moment it looks even a bit out of place, like they are going to go after you and they'll just basically like your advertising campaign will backfire and you'll turn into a meme. And people will mock you.
And you're, you know, every brand should have, and a hell of a lot do it right. Have great strategies which say, who do you want to reach? Why do you want to reach them? What are they getting out of this? It's a value exchange that you're giving brands, because every brand wants to, one, influence you, let's be honest, buy my product, and two, gain loyalty for your whole life cycle, effectively. tapping into this kind of core 16 to 24, 34 audience who don't consume traditional media, who are cash rich, who you can get a hell of a lot of exposure to, is incredibly attractive. But they're also the most savvy audience. They're incredibly tech orientated, very socially connected and socially aware. And they will see what brands are trying to do. So you have to come at it from a very, very authentic point of view. Now that can mean starting your own tournaments, that can be building your own teams, and they could be grassroots teams or local community teams. It doesn't just have to be, let's take an environment and see how many times we can smatter our logo on, or be patronising to the community and say, hey, we reckon that all you 16 to 34 year olds are going to be drinking, really unhealthy soft drinks and eating rubbish food and basically living in your pants in your bedroom. That is an absolute fallacy. It's ridiculous. And so what you have to do is brands have to understand and get, great insight to go, who are this audience and how best do we reach them? Because you're absolutely right, they will be crucified if they don't do that in the right way. And with good reason, quite frankly.
Is that, do you think, a consequence just of maybe the generations that play and watch esports, essentially, like millennials? Like there are, I'm sure there's much older people who play this stuff, but by and large, we're talking like anyone between sort of like 30 and then whatever age at which you can hold a controller. They are the generation that's been most exposed to advertising of any generation ever. And so maybe has the advertisement business maybe dealt itself a really tough hand just by massively trying to advertise to all these kids, to the point that everyone's like immunized to it, and the moment that they think they're being advertised to, they just switch off?
Ads get more sophisticated. They have done since day dot, from wall murals through to outdoor advertising through to TV advertising. Now what you get is, cookies, and cookies will track you, and we know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what you've been consuming, what you like, and I can tailor ads towards you. But when you get the esports audience, they know exactly what you're doing. They'll clear their caches. They understand that, and what they want is they want to be exposed to advertising that yes, feels authentic to them, but doesn't feel creepy, that doesn't feel like, I know exactly who you are, Owen, and I know exactly what you've been looking at, and I will give you something, exactly right, that I think you will like, because actually you'll get a negative adverse reaction to that. What you want is to, ads do great stuff. You think of London Underground without ads, and that is like a warren of mazes with zero colour and with flashing strip lighting, and suddenly it becomes a quite freaky place. Take a magazine or take an online site like an IGN.com, remove all the ads, and what you've got is a cacophony of words thrown at you. You go to the cinema. I went to see It Chapter 2 at the weekend, 3 hours long. And part of the experience is seeing the ads beforehand, seeing what movies are coming up, what other movies, because I like that and I want to see it. So if it's done right, it's welcomed by everybody, no matter what generation. But if it's done wrong, and we always remember those wrong ones, we remember the Trivago woman as being an annoying individual on an advert. Not her fault, it's the advert. And that's when it doesn't quite work, and that's when it narcs people slightly. But done in the right way, advertising can enhance esports, not detract from what it is. Great example, GTA. You look at that and you've got billboards in there and you've got brands in there, and actually it makes sense. Of course it does. Grand Theft Auto wouldn't be Grand Theft Auto if you didn't have the popular culture that surrounded it. The music is part of it, the ads are part of it. Take that and it works incredibly well. What you have to do is just roll that out and go, how does it look in an esports-esque environment?
When you were talking about the perhaps utopian nature of the esports community, and I'm kind of thinking about that and then about advertising now, and there's something about the empowerment of the consumer in the online world that I think changes perhaps the dynamic between brands and the community slightly more, because people can feed back now in real time and create, as you said, memes against them. If you do something dumb, then it's all over 4chan and it's all over Reddit and it's all over Facebook. So there is that, as you've been saying, a drive to produce meaningful, valuable, authentic content, and I think that's a really good force. Because I know there's the kind of cynical position that advertisement is all manipulation and it kind of colonizes public space and rapes your brain, but it also drives our economies fundamentally, and so you take it away and a lot of jobs are going to go, a lot of tax revenue is going to go.
It's a big part of our GDP. You know, people will not realise how many industries it goes into. If you work in a car factory, if you're involved in the kind of anything from the engineering side right the way through to the physical manufacturing of a car, without advertising, your job would not exist. It wouldn't exist. You need, you know, if you pick up an iced coffee drink from a supermarket, you know, the chances are you've picked that up because of advertising, and that can be on-prep promotion, in-store promotion. It can be things that you've seen that you're just not aware that you've seen it. It's a huge part of our economy, and it's a part that influences lots of other things. Should esports embrace it? Hell yes, because that's where the money is. That's where you get the big sponsorships. That's where you get the prize funds. Why people are winning $2.5 million for second place is because brands are getting involved. They just have to do it in the right way.
I think the same tournament that we've been talking about, where this English guy, one kid won loads of money, the same in the 3-on-3 teams, or maybe it was 5v5 teams. The team that won was, I think it was the Volkswagen team, or no, it was a French. It was either Peugeot or Citroën. They actually were like, this is oh wait, no, sorry, that's Fortnite we were talking about. I've gotten mixed up. What I'm talking about right now is, like, a couple months ago there was the car football game with cars that play football. Rocket League. That's it. Yeah, Rocket League. Okay, there was the Rocket League like World Championships, or maybe the European Championships. And Rocket League, it is literally football with cars. It's football, but instead of a dude running around, you're a car that has a rocket engine on it. And Citroën sponsored a team who won. And that's kind of a good example of, like, engaging with the community in a way that, like, makes sense to everyone. And it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. It's like, wow, these guys are sponsored by Citroën, but it makes sense because it's a game about cars. Yeah. So that's, like, you know, sort of acceptable. And that's kind of the interesting sort of conundrum, is that you have to sort of look at the gaming environment in terms of sort of what's actually going on here. What are these people actually doing, and how are we related to that? Because if you're a car company and you're sponsoring a game about cars, that's going to make sense to everyone. If you're a soft drink company and you're sponsoring a game about killing aliens, like, there's not actually as much of a connection there as you might think. Like, maybe if you are some big guy in an office whose son happens to drink loads of Mountain Dew and play video games, that you can sort of see it, but there's no actual sort of, like, connection between those two things other than, like, pure chance cultural association.
Well, it's just about building authentic reasons for a brand to be involved in it. So, you know, I would say automotive brands being involved in esports games when the content is about cars makes sense. But likewise, take it into traditional sports. Volvo also sponsor ocean racing. They don't make boats, but they sponsor the ocean race. Now, no one would question that. No one's going to go, that is a rubbish sponsorship hack. Actually, it makes a hell of a lot of sense, because it's about things like design, it's about elite performance, it's about, you know, sustainability and driving the future. So you have to kind of take a step back and go, as a brand, no matter what brand it is, including Mountain Dew or any soft drink, what is it that you stand for? And if it's about, actually, we want to make the world a fun place to be in, and we want people to come together and form connections. Now, it's all advertising jargon spin, but, we want people to come together and go to the pub and actually have a Coke or a Mountain Dew rather than an alcoholic drink, because actually that is better for you than having 15 pints of lager. Then that makes sense, and you go, okay, well, maybe there is a connection here. It's when you get a brand coming in going, we're a burger fast food, and what we think is that all this audience must eat thousands of these, so we'll just plaster ourselves everywhere. Doesn't make sense. It's offensive. But when you take a step back and go, we're the food that powers elite gaming, whether we will listen to our audience, or we'll have a feedback loop, which is, what do you want to see next? What do you want us to develop? Or can we sponsor a team? Or how do we help the sport grow? That becomes an interesting thing. You've got things like sustainability. Well, esports is the most sustainable frigging sport that's out there. You don't have single-use plastics in esports. Your game console will be used innumerable amount of times. So that's a great thing. You don't have to worry about kind of carbon emissions. I mean, yes, there's a bit about transporting your game console in the first place, but that's where brand can get involved. If it was a DHL or a UPS and they were offsetting, I mean, there's all sorts of different ways that brands can get involved, but it requires a good, like with getting involved in anything, it requires a good, robust strategy, and it requires asking the audience and understanding the esports audience and understanding whether this makes sense, or whether it's just a group of senior execs in a room coming up with some ridiculous strategy that they all shake hands and go, we're going to win awards on this. It hits the community and they go, what the actual hell is this? This is rubbish. This is bullshit.
So do you do any marketing for actual games, like for the game itself, trying to sort of sell like games? Because that seems like an area that is sort of really bizarre to me, because I remember there was when there was the explosion of battle royale games, PUBG and Fortnite are the two huge ones, and PUBG kind of kicked the whole thing off. It has this slightly legendary reputation, even though it's a little bit broken in some ways.
I just asked you to clarify what a battle royale game is.
Oh, okay. It's have you seen the movie Battle Royale?
I think so. So it's like a big arena, right?
Yeah, just a big arena, everyone versus everyone. It slowly gets smaller over time to force everyone together. 100 people enter, one person leaves, or you can do like teams or stuff like that. But yeah, so yes, and then it's obviously Battle Royale, because the movie Battle Royale, which the Hunger Games is actually a rip-off of, is the basis of that. And then PUBG made it, and then Fortnite was originally going to be a zombie game, because zombie games used to be the thing, and then they released a Battle Royale mode, and that did really well. And then like Call of Duty decided, like, screw it, let's do a Battle Royale mode, and that turned out to be really good. But then, like, there were other companies that were like, right, we're going to market our game as, like, this is going to be a professional Battle Royale. So not just a Battle Royale, but a Battle Royale experience that's specifically marketed at tournaments and stuff like that. And I can't remember the name of the game, but I think there was one or two of them, and they just fell completely flat, even though they really invested on the marketing front and bigging up how they wanted to make it into a competitive sport. Whereas like Fortnite was just a zombie game, and they were like, oh, Battle Royale's big, let's put that in our game, and now it's like one of the most played games ever. So do you do any work into, like, marketing of the video games themselves?
I most certainly have. I used to work for a company called IGN, which is one of the big gaming websites.
Yeah.
I used to do a hell of a lot in terms of marketing games. And I suppose the first thing to clarify is the fact that there are different types of games. Not every game is an esports game. And actually you look at a life cycle of a game and they work very differently. So exactly like a movie release, if you want a game, if you want a big Grand Theft Auto 5 or a Call of Duty Black Ops, usually what people do is they'll say, we've spent a hell of a lot of money producing this, developing this, coding this. We need, in the first 2 weeks, for this to break every known record known to humankind. And there are huge expectations in terms of purchase, pre-orders, all of this type of stuff. That's what we want them to do. And if they don't hit that, it's deemed as a failure and it's off. Esports titles work a little bit differently. With the esports title, you're in it for the long term. You're not looking necessarily at this 2-week extravaganza where absolutely everybody's buying in it. It's a flavour of the moment and it's breaking all box office records. You know, some of the best, most authentic and still played games take 2 or 3 years until they're really picked up, embraced by the communities and you know, become tournaments in their own right. So the model is very different. But, you know, you have to look at organisations as well, but particularly game developers and publishers, and go, they're a commercial business. They're not doing it because they go, oh my God, I've made this amazing game and the community are going to love it, and guess what, I'll give it away for free. There's a cost associated with it because people are doing it to make money, to pay salaries, to pay wages, to continue developing more, which is why you have the big boys of the world, you know, the Ubisofts, the EA, the Rockstars. They're developing, and what they look at is trends. You look at market trends, exactly the same as what you do in movies, exactly the same as what you do in music. You go, what is really hot at the moment? So when I went to see It, 3-hour movie, you know, horror movies are big business at the moment. There's a huge trend of people going back to watching really good, shit your pants style horror movies. So you'll see a lot of studios producing a hell of a lot of horror movies now, a lot more than they were 5-6 years ago. It's exactly the same with games publishers. They look at it and go, what are people playing, what's popular, what's getting the most traction out there, and then they will develop for that too, and you'll get a flurry of games which are in exactly the same type of genre, exactly the same type of style, which will suddenly work through, and the community will decide what's good and what's not, and whether enough time's been taken in the story arc, or if it's just a really good competitive, you know, battle royale style. They will decide exactly the same as they do in any kind of popular culture.
So do you ever do, or have you ever been part of any like research into what the next one is going to be? Of kind of like, so, you know, now it's sort of battle royale. Before that it was zombie games, and the transition between the two was like almost instant. There was just this one moment where like all of a sudden the unstoppable flow of zombie games just stops. And, you know, thankfully, because zombies are horrifically overdone as a genre, and if you're thinking of making a movie or a book or anything based on zombies, I implore you to be more original. Like, is there any rhyme or reason to it? Is there anything that, or is it literally just like the community, like, you know, people just put out whatever, and then at a point you just see like, the community's really going in on that? Or
It honestly, it really varies, and it'll vary week on week, year on year. I would say, just like movie studios developing more horror, I would expect horror to be a big thing. Makes sense for a studio. When you're doing a theatrical release, it's the lowest cost production and cheap as chips to make a horror film with the biggest amount of gains. It works a little bit differently in gaming because it costs a lot of money to develop, you know, into code, no matter what genre it kind of sits in. But what I think you'll see more of, I would predict, are horror games which aren't necessarily first-person shooter, which expand the story arc and the world more. Usually with horror games, or the horror genre, it's a very linear. You start at the beginning, you finish at the end, and, you know, there's an arc that runs through it. But some of the most popular games, like the Battle Royale games, are where it's really expansive. So I think what you'll start seeing is more expansive horror genre games. I think that will be big business, and it will mirror very closely what's happening in theatrical at the moment, which is you're about to get a gluttony of horror films.
I think something that strikes me here is that we're actually a bit boxed in by using the word video games or games to describe this emergent cultural phenomenon, because on the one hand you've got things like horror games or narrative-based games where essentially you're going through a story and experiencing yourself as the protagonist. It's more like an interactive movie, really. And on the other end, you've got your more, say, esport type things, a competitive, like FIFA, for example. I mean, there is a story mode sort of with the whole career thing, but really FIFA's about playing football and playing football with your mates or playing football online. And we use the word games because originally that's what these were coming out of, but it would make sense to me if we actually speak about these things in different ways, in the same way we have movies, documentaries, we have autobiographies, we have like fiction books, we have science textbooks. They're not all the same thing. You can bung them together under book or film, but we need a differentiation, and I wonder, that doesn't seem to be that present, at least in the sort of surface level cultural discourse around these things.
And you're absolutely right, and I default and say video games, but you think, what's a video now? Video doesn't exist anymore, so why are we using the archaic term of video and applying it to something that's quite like future facing and is developing? I think you're absolutely right in terms of volume of genres will expand, what we call things will change, whether we start calling it virtual more. Even esports feels a little bit outdated. It's kind of a catch-all in many respects, and I think again it's because, you know, with a lot of traditional sports you have governing bodies that run, and you have, you know, authorities and rights holders that will manage the process. With esports, it's born out of communities. You don't have that. You don't have a hell of a lot of that. There are some governing bodies, and you have leagues, and, you know, the Refreshes or the Riot Games, or the Fanatics, etc. But you don't necessarily have the rigmarole like you do in a traditional sport, and therefore, words have organically progressed and people default to kind of whatever. But you're right in terms of it absolutely should be more defined because they're so different. Playing a zombie game versus a strategy game are leagues apart. So actually we should probably be defining them more, but who will define them and how they will come about?
Yeah, it's not like you can make the committee who are going to decide what we call everything.
Right.
Which is funny, like when I was a kid, I always used to think that that's how new words must be invented. Everyone sat down and was like, right, we need a new word, and we're going to make it up, and then everyone would vote on whether that word was good or not.
But you do have it in esports.
They do that in France. They have the Committee of the French Language who invent new words, and there's a huge cultural battle in France between people who using I think it's like computador. That's the Spanish for computer. There's a francophonized version of computer, and then there's ordinateur, which is the proper French word for computer, decided by the Committee of Speaking French, and so they do that in France, but not so much. I mean, it's not as, like, it's literally official in France, whereas in English it's a bit more.
And also, who decide? You know, to be right in terms of who decides it. What country should decide it? Because the UK is certainly, we don't have the highest propensity of esports or video gamers or any type of gaming here. You know, 10% of UK population who go online will say they're remotely interested or might watch esports. You take that to somewhere like China, 40%. You look at the size of their population versus ours, it's huge. So you might find different genres and different words emerging that aren't English words, that are Mandarin or Cantonese, and why not? Because it should be community based, but if the community is super huge in a different country, then maybe it'll be a Chinglish kind of word that comes about.
So something that's just come to mind here is, do you happen to know where the main studios and producers of games are? Because I'd be interested to know if the main audience is, say, your China and your Korea, etc. Are they producing the games, or who's producing the games?
You do, so it really depends what type of game it is and where it's produced. You have developers worldwide. You have a hell of a lot of developers in the UK, it has to be said, but that's because of tax breaks. You know, sometimes it comes down to the simple economics of producing a game and going, where am I going to get a tax rebate or a tax incentive in order to develop it? And if it's here in the UK, then that's where it'll be. But it might have more traction in a different country, because actually what any type of gaming or any type of esports does really well is take the language barrier away. You know, you don't need to be authentic in any language to be able to play a game. It doesn't matter. So I think while it's not consumed, North America are huge producers of games. England, particularly little hubs like Scotland, you've got hubs in Scotland that produce a hell of a lot of games. It's usually down to the economics of physically doing it.
And then
Germany, really big.
I think some of it's just random, because one of the beauty of video games is that, especially since the advent of Steam, but even sort of before then, and I guess...
I have to pause you and say, I'm really intrigued where this is going when you were like, the advent of Steam.
Oh.
As in Steam, the online? Can I just clarify you don't mean like the list?
I mean, I would
online.
argue that the Steam engine, I mean, the thing you download on your computer to get games, that was probably a bigger turning point in the history of humanity than like the thingy that pump thing.
Than actual Steam.
Steam.
The Industrial Revolution.
That was like the bump in the road. Whereas Steam is a game changer. Steam made by Valve, which is of course the name of the company that first coded Steam, which is hilarious because in theory they make video games, but they take something like 30% off of every sale off of Steam. So now they're just like rolling in money. It's hilarious. But so especially since the advent of basically being able to download your video game from the internet. But even before, like, StarCraft was released like by Blizzard in the USA, and then 2 years later, someone like phones them up and goes like, by the way, like, something like 30% of the population of South Korea plays your video game now. Like, and now if you go to all the StarCraft tournaments, like half or 2/3 of the like winners are South Koreans, and StarCraft is just a national tradition in South Korea. And then because South Korea has conscription, because obviously they're next to North Korea, when like the world champion of StarCraft got conscripted into the South Korean Air Force, the South Korean Air Force started a StarCraft team so we could keep playing StarCraft, and so now the South Korean military competes internationally at StarCraft. And then like another good one is World of Tanks was invented by, it's Russian, and for ages everyone was really angry because all the Russian tanks in World of Tanks were way better than all the other tanks. Everyone was like, it's Russian bias. But their scene is now completely dominated by Chinese players. The Chinese have totally picked up that game, and so now they do all this sort of like marketing to the Chinese market, which is really sort of bizarre to the Europeans because they're inventing, just literally making up out of the blue like Chinese tanks to have more Chinese tanks in the game, and we're like, why are you doing this? You're ruining the historical accuracy. But it's actually just because their main market is now China, and it's one of the really crazy things about video games is that because anyone with a computer, which is basically everyone nowadays, check my privilege right there, like not everyone has a computer, but a lot of people do, like you just don't know like what's going to happen. You can like release a video game. There's so many stories of like indie devs who release like a tiny video game and they have just for fun, and then it becomes huge and all of a sudden they're rich overnight. Or games companies, as I said, like Blizzard, who all of a sudden they're massively marketing to Korea, which they never would have guessed in like 1996 or whenever StarCraft 1 came out. So yeah, it's pretty crazy free for all in that sense.
Yeah, and it's quite nice in some respects to say, we're part of a Western culture. We always view things with a kind of Western slant to go, why aren't things in English, and why would you develop games for, or why would you put tanks in that are Russian tanks? I mean, how dare they, damn it? We've got a lot of war history and they should be using us. But you flip it on its head going, look, there's audiences across the world. They're bigger than our audiences, and actually it's developing faster because of Asian countries that are leading the way in terms of gameplay. And you look at different spins. So I worked on, back in the day, I worked on a big Ghostbusters campaign, not in the 80s because I'm not that old, a big Ghostbusters campaign. Ghostbusters, the reboot, tanked really anywhere, and it couldn't get a pickup in a country where they were hoping it would, which was China, because spirituality and ghosts are a very taboo subject to cover in a lot of different cultures. The same as you look at the reboot. Do you remember the movie of WoW? When they made
World of Warcraft movie,
yeah. Do you remember? Absolutely bombed. Would have been one of the biggest failures in a movie ever had it not been for China, because it nailed it. It basically made all its money and a hell of a lot more by just hitting China, to the point
Wow.
where the studio in the States were going, maybe if we do a number 2 and it's worth us doing a number 2, we should do it in Chinese, not in
Yeah.
English, which is what we've done, because it was so phenomenal and it did so well in China. Everybody, everywhere, all Western countries hated it. Like, it was slated to the nth degree, but they loved it there. So you have to look, you know, different countries like different things for different reasons, and it's about embracing that. And if your biggest market in something like esports is China or a South Korea or a Russia, then there should be more games that are being done. If you're a savvy developer, you'd be going, where's the money? What's going to make me famous? Where's the money? And you wouldn't look to the UK and go, I'm going to develop depending on what the UK audience think. You'd go, where are all they playing? And if they're playing in China, if 40% of their population plays esports or games in their home, why the hell wouldn't you be developing more for that audience? You'd be stupid not to.
Yeah, I think 40% of China, I think that's like basically
It's-
double the USA's population.
Exactly.
Like,
Huge.
Jeez.
yeah, because it's like 1.5 billion in China. So, you know, half of that is like 750 million, and then like knock off a little bit because it's 40%. The USA is 300 million, so that's double the USA's population.
Yeah.
Like,
But I think it's a misconception as well. You know, we always go, what's the biggest market? It's the USA. It's going to be the biggest market. You look at the number 1 selling beer in the world, and it's basically number 1. I mean, I can't even remember off the top of my head, but I thought it would be like a Budweiser, an Anheuser-Busch type of thing.
Oh, is it
It's not. It's a
Tsingtao?
Chinese beer,
Yeah.
and it's
Or
basically
Asahi.
not really.
Or Asahi's Japanese.
It's not really sold outside. It was like something called like Star or something, I think.
oh yeah, Star.
I think.
Yeah.
And
I
it's because
was at a
it's so
Chinese
huge
restaurant.
in China. It's like massive, and that's the number 1 selling beer per capita. And you go, my goodness, well, of course, well, that makes sense. So if that's the case, why wouldn't you have esports games that are driven, you know, the StarCraft 2s of the world by non-Western countries? It's kind of exciting as well, because in an age where you've got things like Brexit, which almost feels as though, you know, and Trump, where the walls are being built and we're kind of becoming segregated in many respects, you've got sports like esports which are going, sod all of that, that doesn't matter, we don't need walls, doesn't matter where you live, we don't care. If you're good enough, come and have a go, because we'll play you in no matter what it is. And I think there's something really nice about that, something really exciting, that, you know, a community can put 2 fingers up to politics and to segregation and go, actually, we don't care about that. You know, if we're going to troll you, it's not going to be because of where you live. Trust us, it'll be because you're rubbish at playing that game, you know, and you're awful. And there's something quite refreshing about that, something nice about that.
So we've only got a couple minutes left, Stacey, and there's something that we like to ask all of our guests towards the end, which is just,
Lord.
is there something that you think that young people especially could do with knowing about the future towards which we're moving?
I think my big thing has always been, you know, individuality and expressing yourself as you see, as you want to do. But it should be about, I think, the world in which we're about to go to will be weirdly a lot more personalised, even though I've talked about no borders existing. I think things will get more virtual. So, you know, I've been working with a company who's developed some amazing haptic suits, which I think we talk about esports. Guess where it's going to go? It's going to go haptic very soon. You know, very soon it will become a big thing. And I think, you know, it's really good that you chose an esports topic on this, because I think esports will be getting really prevalent. It's now up there in one of the top 10 viewed sports, full stop. I think it will get to number 5. I'd be surprised if it wasn't banging on the Olympic stores in terms of viewership. So I think embrace esports, love it for what it is. You know, it's this fantastical ride where you can't predict an end, but everything's going to get more personalised. Don't conform, fuck conforming, be who you want to be, and I think things will adapt towards you. That was a really rubbish answer to that, wasn't it?
No, that was pretty great, actually. That was good. That was inspiring.
Would you say that was the best answer yet?
Ooh.
It's close.
Right
I mean,
answer
you
is
know,
yes.
if for anyone watching, if you want to compare that answer to other answers, do check out and watch the whole of our other episodes.
See, I've
Right
just
to the
helped
end.
promote
Right, yeah,
it.
watch it all the way, otherwise you won't get the context. If you just skip to the end and look at all the final, then you'll miss out on something. But yeah, awesome, great. Thanks for.
But I think the future's
that.
really bright. I think people are going to get involved in more different arenas, and careers are expanding. So go for it.
This is what
Guys,
I
this has
think
been
about
legendary.
this emerging digital culture is
Yeah.
it's so easy to get involved and participate. Like, what are we doing? We're sitting in your office building because we bought a camera and some microphones. And like, we
awesome.
want to record ourselves and have interesting conversations with people. I wonder if this is going to work. Turns out...
Sod it, do it, try it. Who cares if it fails or not? I mean, it's about the trying and the doing, and yeah, screw everyone else.
Yes, screw everyone else. It's about the doing and the trying. That's my motto for the week.
Love it.
Stacey, thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, it's been great talking to
Thank
you.
you.
And
Likewise.
see you guys in the next episode of Technosocial.